All right. Well, good morning, Rotary District 7770, and welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People for Monday, March 29th. My name is Donald Hovis. I am your CWRAP host. I'm from the Chicora Rotary Club in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We're pleased to be joined from the Clemson Extension, coming to us from Columbia today, Karen Jackson. Karen, we look forward to your presentation in a moment. I will do your bio and everything after a few announcements here. Introducing your CWRAP team and the lady who makes all of our speakers possible, schedules them, emails them, does it all from the 5 Points Rotary Club in Columbia, Mary Gask. Mary, thanks for what you're doing. I did make you a co-host, by the way. All right, so Thursday is April Fool's Day, and we know there are no fools in Rotary. So if you could fool somebody, what would you do? Obviously, let's keep this PG, folks. Put that in the chat box with your name and your Rotary Club. Let's see what people would have in mind to do an April Fool. Now, we're going to be talking about stormwater in South Carolina today with Karen Jackson from the Clemson Extension. She is in Columbia, South Carolina, as I said. So here's a little bio on Karen. And then Karen, after this, she'll come off mute and we will begin. Karen is a Water Resources Extension Agent for the PD Region and County Coordinator for Richland County. She has a background in benthic, macroinvertebrates, water quality monitoring, stormwater best management practices, and stream bank repair and restoration. Karen is interested in the response of freshwater streams and anthropogenic disturbance and how to best protect our natural resources. She holds certifications as a non-commercial pesticide license applicator, South Carolina Stormwater BMP Inspector and Maintenance Inspector, and South Carolina Certified Erosion Prevention and Sediment Control Inspector. In her free time, Karen can be found outdoors camping like she's going to be doing this weekend, and hiking with her dog Bear, who you may see in the back possibly, or maybe that's Noodle, the foster dog. So without further ado, let's give Karen a warm welcome. Karen, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I also like Lou Mello's comment about how he once fooled his sister-in-law with the microwave built-in TV combo. That's very funny. So I enjoyed hearing that. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Is that okay? All right.
Go ahead.
All right, again, thanks for having me here today to talk about stormwater in South Carolina. I thought talking about stormwater in South Carolina, I better start off by asking if anybody knows what stormwater is. Feel free to unmute and chime in if anybody wants to give me a rough definition.
Hey, Karen, this is Bob Gross. I'm in Beaufort, and I'd like to introduce Dan Ahern, who is also on the call. Dan was the Beaufort County Stormwater Manager for here in Beaufort, and he and I each have about 50 years experience in the water quality area. So stormwater is what doesn't soak into the earth, basically.
Right, that's perfect. And now I'm a little more nervous that I've got some professionals on here and I'm talking about stormwater. So feel free to chime in again and correct me if I mislead anybody on anything. So you're absolutely correct. So it's any kind of overland flow from precipitation, whether that's rain, sleet, or snow. The big thing here is that it's going down our storm drains untreated. So it's not going to a treatment plant. So if you see a cigarette butt go down the storm drain, it might pop out in the Broad River the following day. So there's a lot of education and really good information out there on how to keep that stormwater clean so that we can keep our waterways clean. And really our landscape affects stormwater quite a bit. So if we think about a natural forested system with a lot of green spaces, a lot of native vegetation, we've got a lot of that stormwater doesn't run off. Instead, the water hitting the ground goes back into the groundwater, it infiltrates, or it's evapotranspirated off of trees. But when we get into more of an urban setting like Columbia, we find that we have more impervious surfaces like roadways, buildings, driveways, things like that. And we've got up to 55% becoming that stormwater runoff. So why is that bad? Well, there's the potential to have a lot of nasty stuff in stormwater runoff, right? You can just imagine what's on the Target parking lot right now if that went down the storm drain. Not the best, most clean thing we can be putting in our waterways. So I'll just touch on a few pollutants that we talk about a lot. The first being nutrients. These pictures are from a recent site visit I did to a pond that had some aquatic weeds, including this filamentous algae. So naturally occurring, but when we've got an excess of nutrients, possibly from stormwater runoff, it kind of explodes and becomes problematic. When we talk about excess nutrients in our waterways, we can pinpoint some ways it gets in there. One is when we have people putting a lot of fertilizer in their lawn. That maybe is a little overkill. The whole more is better type of thinking just might not be the best for water quality. So when we have that next storm event, it can run off into your pond, into storm drains, into rivers, and cause some issues. We also have nutrients coming in from like illicit discharges. So just people illegally putting things in our streams. I don't think I'm speaking to that group right now. I think you guys are probably pretty aware. You shouldn't hook your like washer up and run it outside to the creek and back. But that does happen. We can also get nutrients from pet waste, wildlife and livestock waste. We had a call last year from a pond owner who his cattle had just free access to the pond, and he ended up with a cyanobacteria bloom because there was such an influx of nutrients. So really just keeping that at bay. And the big thing with nutrients is if you have a huge algal bloom and then they die, well, bacteria are going to decompose the algae, and then dissolved oxygen is being used up, and we get things like fish kills or just low dissolved oxygen conditions, which aren't good for any of our waterways. Bacteria is another issue. I spotted this pile of poop while I was walking my dog a year or two ago. Someone had not cleaned up after their pet, and as you can see, there's a storm drain like literally downslope, just like 5 feet. And so things like that can really add to bacteria. And I think sometimes people just don't think about dog waste as having such an influence, but researchers can actually do microbial source tracking, and they can figure out, is this bacteria from canines? Is it from livestock, waterfowl, or humans? And, a lot of times, a lot of it is from dog waste. And so that bacteria obviously isn't good if we want to go swimming during the hot months. Some other ways we can get bacteria is through humans. So if people aren't keeping up with their septic systems, that can influence water quality. I know right now Columbia is upgrading their sewer system because it was built, so many years ago that it was not able to withstand, the population that it was now serving. So just upgrading that infrastructure makes a huge difference in some of that bacteria as well. We've also got sediment. So, dirt belongs in streams at a certain point, but not when it's runoff from buildings or sites that are being constructed. So this was a picture I took out at Lake Greenwood last summer, and they had not put up like very good any kind of erosion control practices right here. You can see there's some kind of erosion control matting and then some silt fences, but obviously that's a huge slope and that's a lot of sediment. So you can see it starting to plume down here into the lake. So there's a lot of reasons we don't want sediment from stormwater runoff getting into our streams and ponds and rivers. So it's going to actually attract sunlight, and so it warms up the water around it, which is kind of crazy. But that water then, if it's warmer, it holds less dissolved oxygen, and a lot of aquatic organisms thrive on that dissolved oxygen. It can also be abrasive to the gills of fish. It can fill in any habitat for spawning, or habitat for those benthic macroinvertebrates I had in my bio. So basically the aquatic insects that, are a really big part of that food web. It can also fill in ponds. I was at a pond last week, and this homeowner was about to dredge again for another $3,000 because there was so much sediment from the stormwater runoff coming into her pond. And lastly, it can be actually absorptive to pollutants. So it can bind to pesticides and fertilizers and bring it into the water with it. So a lot of bad things about sediment. Of course, we know litter's a problem. I did a cleanup a few weeks back at the Saluda Riverwalk. A lot of styrofoam and beer cans from people who have really poor taste in beer. Those are probably the big ticket items. And then if anybody's in Columbia, this was a screenshot from a news report maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, just talking about all the pollution at the top of the diversion dam on the Broad River, which is where we get our drinking water. And so just showing the concern about that buildup, and then questioning, does that mean there's microplastics in the canal, which is our drinking water? So really trying to spotlight how, we've got this drainage area, and all that trash was just coming to the head of the dam. So obviously not good for water. And then thermal stress, which people are generally surprised by. But if you think about a big old parking lot in the summer, that where a big rain event comes and that water washes down, eventually leads to the next, you're in the nearest stream or river, that water has actually created an issue because it's warmer and it's changing the environment. And that can stress our little aquatic macroinvertebrates. So this is a little stonefly, our fish, our aquatic organisms only have a certain limit of temperature. And so we can really do some harm by influencing that. And so just looking at our water quality in South Carolina, you can see bacteria, which I talked about, is a leading impairment. We've got about 362 impairments. Most of those are coming from streams. I talked about how nutrients and dissolved oxygen are pretty tightly coupled. So they even actually couple those together when they're doing these reports of these impaired waterways. And then the poor macroinvertebrates, we've got about 173 streams that don't have a good enough macroinvertebrate community. So that's very reflective of water quality. So in total, about 720 streams, but over 1,200 impairments overall. And so if we look at on a map, all these little dots you see here are those impairments you just saw in that chart. So pretty widespread, maybe a little bit concentrated right here, but pretty widespread. And then the pink areas and the pink triangles are basically areas where they've said, okay, there's an impairment, but now we've developed a plan. We know where the pollution's coming from. We know why it doesn't meet water quality standards, and we know how to fix it. And so that's kind of the next step. So that's, a step in the right direction. But you can see there's a lot of that in the upstate, and I'm not sure if that's, higher gradient areas, so more stormwater into our streams, or if it's just, rapid growth kind of contributing to those water quality impairments. Could be any of those things. But definitely taken from DHEC, so good representation of what's going on throughout the state. So when it comes to regulating stormwater, it's good to know there's kind of two categories of pollution. One is non-point source pollution. So you can't point to the source. That includes stormwater runoff. It's unidentifiable. I'm contributing to it. You guys are contributing to it. It's just, it's the largest source of water quality impairments because it's so hard to control. In contrast, we've got point source pollution. We know where that's coming from. We can point at the pipe where there's some funky stuff coming out into the river, and it's point source pollution. We tackle this point source pollution because, we've had that Clean Water Act in 1972, and out of that Clean Water Act, we have the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. It's a mouthful, so we call it the NPDES permit. And so that's going to tackle three big point sources. We've got sources from municipalities. We call those MS4s, municipal storm sewer systems, separate storm sewer systems. We've got industrial activities and construction activities. And so that's going to regulate the stormwater discharge from these three potential sources, and operators of these sources are going to be required to get that NPDES permit before they can discharge anything into a water of the US. So that MS4, they're contributing stormwater into waters of the state through these catch basins, these man-made channels, pipes, tunnels, ditches. And so those are regulated as well. And so to prevent those harmful pollutants from being washed or dumped into an MS4, that NPDES permit is going to require a variety of things like public education and outreach, a stormwater management program, pollution control program, that sort of thing. So that's how kind of some of these pollutions are regulated. Where Clemson kind of comes into more of the stormwater aspect, we have a program called Carolina Clear. I was a part of that for the first 3 years of Clemson. I worked in Richland County, but this is just a snapshot of where we have some of these stormwater consortiums, where there's municipal partners, there's education partners, and there's a water resources agent. And they work together to create programs for the public for activities and education and participation to address some of these stormwater issues. So that's part of that NPDES stormwater permit. So for instance, I've got a friend in Sumter. She works with just a handful of partners to address some of these stormwater issues, whereas down on the coast, our agents in Berkeley, Dorchester, and Charleston have like 23 education partners or something pretty big like that. So they've obviously got a wider area of coverage, a larger population. And so these programs, are in various topics like shoreline buffers, citizen science, stormwater ponds, managing water in the home landscape, all sorts of things to help homeowners and professionals to better, manage our stormwater. So I did want to touch on some of those, what we call best management practices for stormwater management. One big program we have is educating people on stormwater ponds. So I thought it was appropriate to start off with stormwater ponds for stormwater. So these are best management practice. They're engineered, they're built structures, and they're meant to control stormwater runoff and to prevent flooding. So they're going to capture stormwater, they're going to treat it, allow pollutants to settle out before moving it downstream into our local waterways. It can also provide a really great community benefits. So there's wildlife, you can imagine this is a really nice looking pond. We've got habitat for birds, fish, some recreational activities, just pleasing to the landscape for homeowners. One thing you shouldn't do in a stormwater pond is swim in it, because you can think back to that slide with all the pollutants and stormwater. It's just sitting in that pond possibly. So don't swim in it and don't eat the fish you catch from it. So catch and release is fine, but don't eat those fish. If we look at just a really simplified diagram of what a stormwater pond does, so it's capturing water either from overland flow, like sheet flow, or from these inlets. The vast majority is from inlets, but the sheet flow is going to contribute the majority of the pollutants. So that's why, making sure you're having some good stewardship for our land will help influence, our water quality. So that water comes in, it's got a settling period. It's supposed to stay in there for about 24 hours to let those pollutants settle out, the sedimentation to kind of hit the bottom before it ultimately is going to flow out of the outlet structure. And it's controlled by this low flow orifice. So that's just a quick and dirty overview of a stormwater pond. We have a lot of resources if anybody has one in their community and is interested in learning a little bit more, and I'll show some of those resources at the end. So probably one of the biggest things we work on with pond owners, whether it's stormwater ponds or recreational fishing ponds, is establishing a shoreline buffer to really influence water quality. So these buffers are great because they're going to intercept any overland flow. They're going to absorb nutrients. They're going to stop bacteria from getting in the water. They're going to hold that shoreline together so it's not eroding and depositing that sediment back into, the water, like I showed that picture from Greenwood. And we work in 4 different zones. And the neat thing about each of these zones is there's a beautiful array of plants that work really great in the littoral zone or the emergent zone. So the littoral is going to be where it's, 1 to 4 feet deep, that water's penetrating to the bottom. The emergent zone, those plants are actually rooted underneath the water surface, but they're going to flower above the surface. As we move up, we hit the riparian zone. So soil's a little bit moist still, so you need plants that kind of thrive on that moisture. And then the upland zone is where it's going to be rather dry, but it's still very important. And so this was a project done, down in our coastal area, and it was a stormwater pond, and you can see they don't have any kind of buffer. So you can imagine that sheet flow just coming off and just hitting and entering that pond right away. Another thing we see is these little ripples. Man, over time, those can really beat down the shoreline and create a little shelf and expose that sediment. And so our agents and their partners went in and put in a variety of native plants, and you can see it just is aesthetically pleasing. It's creating a really healthy buffer, and just that water quality is really going to benefit from that. Sometimes people think this looks messy, but you can make it as messy and as wild as you want, or you can make it as intentional looking as you want, rows of the same species, gradients of colors, that sort of thing. So like I said, there's so many plants that, you can really make it your own. Another project that I was involved with was what seemed like forever ago, 5 years, at the Sandhill Research and Education Center. That's where my office is. We had a shoreline planting that was in response to some erosion issues. They had built an amphitheater, and that shoreline really suffered from it. You can see they put up a silt fence, but that silt fence was really filling up with sediment. You can see there's some gullies kind of leading down into the pond. So we installed a variety of native plants. We also installed what's called a wetland carpet, and these are really neat. We purchased it from Charleston Aquatic Nurseries. If anybody's on the coast and has bought from them, they were really helpful for this project. So it's a carpet of, native coconut or natural coconut fiber. And the cool thing is that there's some mature plants that are already rooted in it. So this is the underside of the mat, and you can see those roots are, pretty well established and developed. And so we rolled those things out. I think they're like 15 feet long, 3 feet wide, maybe. We staked them down, and then within a few months, this was pickerel weed, some other things, but they really started to root into the ground and take over where that erosion had once been in that exposed sediment. So that was a really exciting project. This was right after we planted. This is sometime later that summer, I think. Another example, I did this presentation or a similar presentation once, and someone was like, "That looks horrible." And I was like, okay, I definitely respect that. Some people just don't want that wild look, which is fine. And that's why I said earlier, you can make it your own. There's so many plants to choose from. You can make it look very intentional. Since this was at the rec, we kind of just let it go wild. I also turned my back and someone just went crazy with some native seeds. So that also contributed to some of the brushy look. But it was a really fun project. And just some plants that we often use. We've got lizard's tail up in the upper left. You can see it kind of looks like a tail. It's got those white spiky flowers. Golden canna, huge yellow flower, almost has a tropical look to it. I use muhly grass a lot. This obviously isn't on a shoreline, but it does really great in like warm, hot, dry conditions. This is actually at a pollinator garden, but it works well in that upland area as well for a shoreline. Just really tough and hardy. This is that pickerel weed that was in that wetland carpet. And I really like these flowers. It's like a cone of small purple flowers. I think it blooms in an upward direction, and those seeds, heard you can actually dry them out and put them in like your granola. I've never tried it. I should. But waterfowl and birds, you can imagine, love pickerel weed. There's also blue flag iris. I generally end up recommending that if someone has a wet spot in their yard that they want taken care of, because they just love to have their feet wet. And then cardinal flower. I see this also along streams a lot, and it's really pretty. So this is just a small snapshot of all the options you could have. And I wanted to follow the shoreline section up with another shoreline, but a riparian shoreline, or a riparian buffer for our stream. So riparian just meaning that land adjacent right along the stream. And so it's very similar. The reasons to put, something like this in is it's going to catch that stormwater overland flow before it hits our streams. Streams have got more velocity to them than a pond. So you can imagine that having those roots in place is going to really protect it from any kind of erosion and water passing through the area. And this was actually a project in downtown Columbia. I wasn't involved, I wish, but it was the city of Columbia. They did a fantastic job. They actually daylighted this stream. So it was a daylighting project where this stream called Smith Branch was actually in a pipe for years and years and years and just kind of shoved downstream. They did a big stream restoration effort, and they daylighted it, put in all these native riparian plants. There's a really pretty retention pond upstream or downstream of that as well. And so you can imagine it's, instead of being in a pipe and kind of rushed downstream to probably erode, further reaches, it's got time to kind of get out in the floodplain, benefiting wildlife. There's probably little macroinvertebrates and bugs in there that are serving as food sources for all kinds of animals. So crazy contrast. I wish I had a before picture, but you can imagine a big ugly pipe. I'm sure it was underground, but a really cool project. So it's in the Bull Street district. If anybody is in the Columbia area, which I know some of you are, it's really cool. I was there 2 days ago. It's not as impressive right now because obviously it's the dormant season, but I would think in a month or so it should be booming again. And so, we get a lot of calls from homeowners who have streams on their property. And a lot of times, the issues stem because there's been a removal of vegetation. And so probably one of the frequent reasons is because the neighbor upstream mowed down all the riparian vegetation. That's how calls generally start. And so this is a homeowner we're going to see, I think, next week in the upstate. And this is on the outside of a meander bend. So you can imagine that stream kind of curving around. As it curves, this is going to erode first because that water's coming down and hitting that corner before it makes a turn. And so the person upstream had taken out oaks and other really large vegetation that had been holding all that soil and slowing down the water. So now he's got some bank slumpage, and I think it's probably unfortunately going to fail. So hopefully we'll be able to go up and recommend some good management practices for him. This is another site, similar thing. They had a neighbor come and upstream, he just mowed everything down. And so they're kind of suffering the consequences. So they've got some, I don't know, it's pretty dark right here, but it's just really undercut. And that bank's probably going to have some failure over the course of time. This was actually at a campsite I went to up in Pisgah Forest. And I think we're going to do a joint South Carolina, North Carolina workshop there at some point, try to fix that stream. So, sometimes people think putting stone along their shoreline or their stream shoreline is a good way to go. And that can definitely work in some situations. But unfortunately, that water can really get behind that riprap or that hardscaping and dislodge some of those boulders or those stones. And so now you see there's exposed sediment. And so you've got a whole another issue there. So like I said, it can work in certain situations, but we really try to get more of like a native approach. And so, after getting all these calls and seeing these issues, we've developed this program called Stream Bank Repair to try to address these problems we see with the sedimentation, erosion, failing banks, and all that. So we've had a lot of fun with it. It's only like a year and a half old. And basically what we're doing is we're taking live cuttings from these dormant species, like going out in the winter and finding an elderberry or willow. We're taking just a 2 to 3 foot cutting. I've got about 256 of them in my state vehicle right here. And you just put them in the bank and they're live. They start to grow. There's no instant gratification when we do these projects because you're just jamming a stick into the shoreline and you're like, okay, I guess I'll come back in a couple months and hope for the best. But it doesn't take long for them to start growing underground and above ground biomass. So this is an elderberry. This is about a year after a project. And this black willow's, I guess, aggressive, but in a good way, as long as it's in a good setting and it's intentional. This is maybe 2 months after we put that live stake in, it just started going. So a lot of what this stream bank repair program does is use these live stakes to reestablish that riparian buffer and hopefully stabilize that stream that's begun to erode. If you guys are interested, this is the website for Stream Bank Repair. We've got a newsletter coming out every 2 months is our goal, so not too overwhelming. But it also answers some frequently asked questions. So we've gotten a huge response since we've launched these newsletters and this website. So we've got a pretty busy schedule looking at some of these sites and hosting workshops so that the public can come, take some knowledge home, and hopefully address any issues they might have on their property. So that's all I have for Stream Bank Repair, but it's like my obsession right now. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that. And so really a lot of what our projects look at, the information we try to give out is really, creating more green spaces to allow any kind of water to infiltrate, to hold in soil, to benefit wildlife. And a lot of that just surrounds putting the right plant in the right place. And so really looking at your site conditions and saying, what species are going to fit that instead of trying to force your site conditions and species to act a certain way. And so we're using native plants. It's going to benefit everybody, including the native wildlife. And so native plants have this really great root system. I love this image. It shows turf grass, got a pretty shallow root system and pretty short above ground, but we have these native plants. They've got long roots. that's going to hold in soil. It's got surface area for like any kind of microbial processes, using up nitrogen, that sort of thing. And then above ground, again, habitat for pollinators, but also slowing down any kind of water runoff. And we've got a really great resource that I probably use on a weekly basis. It's called the Carolina Yards Plant Database. So it helps you look at that right plant for the right place. You can enter in all your site characteristics, whether that's, what specific plant type you want, whether it's a shrub, grass, perennial, what your soil looks like. Is it, pretty sandy? Is it clayey? Do you get a lot of sunlight, a lot of shade, all sorts of things? And it generates a list of all the plants that are going to work really well for that site condition. So you can see that it also has plant details. So it'll let you know, how big is this going to get? Do I have room for it? When's the best time to plant? And then we probably have a fact sheet on how to care for it as well. So this is probably one of my favorite tools that Clemson Extension has. It's helpful for me on my property, as well as when someone calls with an issue on their property. Our website has some more resources. That Carolina Clear program, that's where you're going to find, do I have a water resources agent or a stormwater consortium where I live, and what kind of programs are they doing right now? If you like the whole stormwater pond slides, you can look at this link. It'll give you all information about stormwater ponds. We have a lot of residential and youth programs and hybrid trainings for professionals. So we've got a lot going on. We actually just updated this website. It's a very painstaking process, as you can imagine. So definitely go check it out, make us feel better about all the work, but hopefully, you can find some resources there. Another go-to I always recommend to people is our Home and Garden Information Center. So we've got basically a fact sheet on anything. I'm a recent homeowner, and I've inherited like camellias and azaleas, and I don't know what I'm doing. So I generally Google, camellia diseases, HDIC, and someone's written up something on how to identify and address camellia diseases. So we've got a lot of fact sheets. Basically, if I get a number of calls on a certain topic, I realize that I should develop a fact sheet so someone can have like something tangible with a lot of good information that they can reference from here on out. So some that would be applicable to stormwater. We've got a pretty new one for stormwater management with trees. Another one from last year, managing water in the home landscape. I'm sure you can imagine, in the beginning of COVID, we kind of had a backlog of fact sheets we wanted to do, and we kind of had a little bit more time without people coming in directly into our office to work on some of these. So we got a lot done last year. And then, of course, stormwater ponds, a guide for pond owners. So these are just like a few of the many, many fact sheets that we have. So lots of good resources from Clemson. I hope you guys will check them out. Hope I didn't talk too fast. And I'm happy to answer any questions. There's my dog Bear. Noodle is our Basset Hound Foster mix. So he's a very different morphology than our Lab Shepherd mix. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
All right, so we've got them in the chat box, and we've got several, and I want to try to make sure we have time to get to all of them. So if the first question is, are you able to share the slides?
Yeah, yep, I can send it to Mary. I can send it to you today.
That was one question. So we'll try to get to them all here. My club is considering a pollination garden project for several stormwater ponds. Anything we should know or consider for the project?
I think just really that right plant, right place. One thing I failed to mention on the Carolina Yards Plant Database is you can select for different projects. So if you want all the plants to be, for a rain garden, you can select rain garden. And I think there might be one for pollinator gardens, but if not, there's we have pollinator garden fact sheets, and it gives you a list of plants that would work well. So you're really just making sure you kind of know what kind of soil you have. Maybe do a soil test beforehand. It's $6, but it'll give you a little more information. And pay attention to, is it constantly wet? Because there's a variety of species that love that. Or is it going to be dry and you need something like muhly grass and black-eyed Susan and that sort of thing. So I've done a few pollinator projects. They're really fun. We just have so many resources, you kind of can't go wrong. So, and you can always email me directly too, and I'm happy to help you with species.
I would say if you could put your contact slide back up. So if someone needs your email address, do that and leave it up for a little while. And folks, if you're on here and you want it, Here's your chance to get it. There you go. Thank you very much. Next question. When new housing divisions are being approved and they include ponds, how does the state regulate that for proper stormwater control?
Oh, that's an engineering question that whoever said something to me at the beginning of this might be able to address that more, but I think it has to do with pre-development conditions and making sure there's no impacts to the adjacent waterways and getting those best management practices up. But yeah, sometimes those ponds are used as a best management practices to capture any kind of runoff, let it settle out. So that's pre-development conditions.
All right, I'll take your slide down now, Bob. We'll get to you. We'll get to you. We got a few more questions here.
Yeah, that's a Bob question for sure.
Have you worked with Colonel Dawson on the work his organization is doing along the Riverwalk?
I haven't, haven't been in touch with that group. I think that's more, Congaree Riverkeeper, Bill Stangler, if you know him, I think he's probably been more with that. I technically cover the PD area and I did stormwater for Richland County. So it's kind of out of my wheelhouse. I try not to step on too many toes, which is easy to do. So yeah, I think there's enough cooks in the kitchen on that one. I go to the Riverwalk a lot. I kayak there, walk my dog. So I'm in touch with, I live next to Karen Kustovic, who's a City of Columbia Park Ranger. So she keeps us up to date on the happenings, but yeah.
Last question before we turn it over to Bob. He's got some comments for you. How can faith-based communities who have interest in environmental justice and creation theology connect with your work?
That's a good question I haven't had. I've worked with some church groups before. I think just finding, I don't know where you are, but I can help get you in touch with like your specific agent and just establishing a relationship with that agent and seeing what kind of needs that you have and just communicating that with the agent. I think that would be a great relationship and great programs moving forward. So just really reaching out. We get calls and emails from the public all the time. So we try to be out and about as much as we can. So we're happy to, form partnerships.
Thank you. Bob Gross, take it away.
Thank you, Donald. We can talk about this all day, but one of the things that I wanted to mention, Karen, is that Rotary just began supporting the environment as one of its areas of focus. And you mentioned a couple of typical projects that we might have some real interest in. Mm-hmm. Stream bank repair, daylighting streams. Each of our 77 clubs in our district, Eastern South Carolina, can apply for a district grant. So if you know of an area where that work would be applicable, if you have a stream bank repair project, I suggest contact the local Rotary Club, and Mary can hook you up, or I can hook you up, and they can apply for a district grant and can work with you on that project. So that's something that you might want to look at down the road.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I had no idea, so I will definitely share that with my stream bank repair partner.
Okay, about 45 years ago, now part of DHEC is called OCRM, Office of Coastal Resources Management. 45 years ago, that was called Coastal Council. And they started the program of requiring sedimentation ponds for all construction east of US 17. And that was the beginning of that work. Well, the then Congress State Representative, State Senator Arthur Ravenel asked the question, well, who's going to maintain these ponds? Who's going to clean them out? To your point about not swimming in the pond because of the contaminants in there. And by the way, those of us who have to replace tires and brakes on our cars, where do those brakes and tires go? I think it goes off and runs on and gets on the road and runs off into the stormwater. But one of the shortcomings in the program, Karen, is that there's no real requirement to maintain these ponds and to clean them out periodically. So I'd like to ask you if there's any thought about that, and if any of the material that's coming out of those ponds is hazardous or toxic. And then lastly, I know that Dan is chomping at the bit, because down here in the low country, we don't have sedimentation issues so much, we have bacterial issues. But would you address the pond issues, please?
Yeah, we have one of our hybrid programs is the post-construction best management program, and it's a certification. And so I believe it covers some stormwater ponds, but like SEPSCI, that Certified Erosion Prevention Control Inspector program, like that's required by DHEC, but this post-construction BMP, I don't believe it is, but it is something that helps, maintenance. Because I've even heard that from the city of Columbia, like, it's great we put in this bioretention cell, but no one knows how to clean it. And, a couple years down the road, it's probably not functioning at its full capacity. So that's why that program was made, and that's on our website as well. And it's, we're doing these programs, COVID or no COVID, we put everything virtually. So hopefully that's helping some of these people that have to manage those. But the whole requirement, that's a tough one. As for the spoils, I believe it's expensive, and you might have to have a permit for that dredging of the stormwater pond material to take it off site. I think the key is off site. If it stays on site, right, you don't have a permit, but then, what are you going to do with that? Fill in the hole with like heavy metals or bacteria?
That is exactly the point. That's exactly right, Karen. I know that Dan's chomping at the bit.
All right, Bob, that's a good intro. And Karen, a great presentation. Thank you. That's a really good one. And one of the things that we learned in Beaufort County, because Beaufort County had been a very active citizen-driven community that had really set up their own program and sort of moved ahead pretty far. When I got there, we ran into a problem, as Bob mentioned, with bacteria. And that was we had a lot of shellfish beds that were open. They're more stringent than even recreation criteria, and we ran into problems with that. And we had some very stringent stormwater controls. When you get development, think of it as three impacts. You get water running off faster, you get pollutants, as you mentioned, but the third impact is the one that we sort of found out was the driver. As you mentioned in those slides, you get a lot more water running off. Well, if you slow it down and clean it up, what's the problem? Well, we found out that extra water was causing a problem because we had a lot of wetlands. Wetlands are wonderful for picking up nutrients, but our coastal forested wetlands had a lot of bacteria in those wetlands. And if you put more water in it, and we had big debates with DOT because they said, there's no bacteria running off the roads, but there was a lot of water running off the roads, and they were going into the wetlands, and guess what was coming out of the wetlands? A lot more bacteria. And we just, because we measured we had with Town of Bluff, we had all sorts of bacteria measurements, and our ponds were doing a very good job of reducing the bacteria. But then right into the creek and further down the creek, we were getting all these higher bacteria levels. And we found out, well, one of the way to address it is try to bring back, and that's what I think too, those ponds. And you sort of in your drawing sort of had it. Ponds, the old types of ponds that were built with a development were called detention ponds. Mm-hmm. And just as you said, they held the water back and let it out at a slower rate. That addressed the first impact. But what we found out, you really need some retention, which is water that goes in that doesn't come out. And we said, well, how do you do that? Well, you can let it out slowly. And there was some research by NOAA in Charleston where you get, it's another problem in the coastal zone. In our tidal creeks, you get salinity, and the marine biologists say that causes a big problem. You get water running off real quick. Even if you do detention, that water, the salinity goes down. That causes some biological impacts on spawning and other things. So you have to look at retention. So one of the things that ponds, even though you don't want to fish and you don't want to swim in those, you ought to look at them as a potential resource for what? For irrigation. And what we do in Beaufort County is not very good. And who the previous director of the Water and Sewer Authority said, you can quote him on this, was we take water 40 miles down by channel from the Savannah River, take it by channel, dug channel, treat it to drinking water standards, have bigger pipes and major storage. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, you can throw that drinking water on your lawn. You don't need drinking water on your lawn. And we didn't realize this later, some of our gated communities actually were doing this, because what did they do? They had major pond systems for their golf courses. And what did they do? They pumped out of those ponds and irrigated the golf courses. Now, a lot of times then those ponds were not as aesthetic because the ponds were what? Lower. But then when it rained, that extra water didn't run off. So that's just a little thing, but the amount of runoff can cause problems even when you've got those aspects too.
Right.
A great presentation, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad I had you and Bob here. So that's helpful. You can answer the hard questions, but we have a agent, her name is Ellen Como, down in the Beaufort area. And I know she has a lot of pond programs because you guys have so many ponds. So really trying to get the value out there and show how they can be aesthetically pleasing, and but also how to maintain them correctly so they keep that storage capacity and keep that water quantity problem at bay, hopefully. So I know she's pretty big, and bacteria is one of her top pollutants of concerns that she works with. So yeah.
Karen, thank you so much for your presentation. Unfortunately, I do have to jump in and round this up here. Dan and Bob, you have her information. So if you want to reach out to her, excellent.
Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed it.
And don't leave. We're going to round it up with, we'll do a final close and then we can say sayonara. So thank you for being on here. As you know, we do this every Monday at 11 o'clock. Next Monday coming up is Amanda McNulty, ETV, Making It Grow program. Spring is the time to make it grow. As a reminder, also, I announced it last week. I want to announce it every Monday between now and the 4th of May, which is a Tuesday. That will be our district conference that'll be virtual from 6:15 to 8:15 on Zoom. Don't want anyone to say we didn't know it was happening. May 4th. May the 4th be with you. We will see you, folks, next Monday for the next conversation with Rotary Action People. Enjoy your week. We'll conclude with the Rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill or better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a great week, folks. See you next Monday on the next conversation with Rotary Action People. Take care, folks. That's a wrap. Bye-bye.